Hey there, wake up. It's Means Morning News. Just after 11 a.m. on the East Coast, I'm Sam Sachs, the newsman. Although that's the exact same thing I would say if I was an imposter. I'm just kidding. I'm the real Sam. The imposter Sam has a mustache. And we begin in Washington, D.C., where lawmakers reopen the government. The White House planned to spend the day doing victory laps and dunking on Democrats, but instead, it found itself again responding to evidence that the President of the United States is a pedophile. And it's something the entire nation has to grapple with. Democrats on the House Judiciary Committee released some damning as hell emails shedding new light on President Trump's relationship with child sex trafficker and rapist Jeffrey Epstein. One email was sent between Epstein and his convicted accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell. The others were with author Michael Wolff. The messages suggest that the president was far more aware of Epstein's crimes than he's let on, and they raised the stakes of a push on Capitol Hill to force disclosure of FBI files related to the case that Republican leadership have tried to keep hidden. In one email to Maxwell from 2011, Epstein writes, quote, "I want you to realize that the dog that hasn't barked is Trump." Epstein adds that one of his victims, whose name is redacted in the email, quote, "spent hours at my house with him," referring to Trump. "He has never once been mentioned." Maxwell wrote back, quote, "I have been thinking about that." Yes, now we're all thinking about that. Whatever it means, it's proof Trump was aware of what Epstein was up to. And it's also proof that Maxwell lied in her interview with Trump's personal lawyer and now Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche when she claimed she had never seen Trump at Epstein's house. Though she was likely instructed to lie to benefit the president, and then she got rewarded for it with preferential treatment in prison. Back to the emails. In a later one with Wolff from 2019, Epstein states, quote, "Trump said he asked me to resign, never a member, ever." And then, quote, "Of course he knew about the girls, as he asked Ghislaine to stop." Wolff interviewed Epstein several times for a book, and he's the provenance of the claim that Epstein possessed photos of Trump with topless young girls who may have been underage. And lawyers for Epstein's victims have repeatedly claimed that the FBI is in possession of implicating photos and video. In another released email, Epstein asked a New York Times reporter if he wanted to see photos of, quote, "Donald and girls in bikinis in my kitchen." During Trump's first run for president in 2015, Epstein strategized with Wolff over what Trump should say during the presidential debates if he's ever asked about their relationship. Wolff advises Epstein, quote, "I think you should let him," referring to Trump again, "hang himself. If he says he hasn't been on the plane or to the house, then that gives you a valuable PR and political currency. If it really looks like he could win, you could save him, generating a debt." Wow. Not a good look for Wolff there, obviously, but he is someone who would have in-depth knowledge about Epstein and Trump's relationship, so his advice here is pretty damning for the president. Now, these emails were obtained through the Epstein estate via a subpoena from the Judiciary Committee in the House. They did not come from the FBI, which under Kash Patel and Attorney General Pam Bondi closed the Epstein case earlier this year, claiming there's nothing left to look into. The White House refused to address the contents of these latest emails. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt claimed that the messages were, quote, selectively leaked to the liberal media in order to smear Trump. Well, if they were selectively leaked, then the best way to prove it is just to have everything released out in the open so people can judge for themselves, right? Well, good news. Congresswoman Adelita Grijalva was sworn in on Wednesday and immediately signed the discharge petition to force a vote on a measure to compel the FBI to release its Epstein case files. That vote is expected next week. So the White House should be supportive of it, right? In order to prove that these latest emails were selectively released, right? Right? Obviously not. Instead, President Trump spent Wednesday lobbying female Republican lawmakers who had signed the discharge petition to remove their names to prevent that vote from happening. Reps Lauren Boebert and Nancy Mace were reportedly pressured by the White House. Boebert was even summoned to meet with Trump in the Oval Office. The president is reportedly promising Republicans that if they block the release of the Epstein files, they'll be protected from primary challengers. Leavitt was asked by reporters about this pressure campaign from the White House, and she attempted to spin it as a good thing. Take a look.
Caroline, why are White House officials then meeting with Representative Boebert in an effort to try and get her to not sign this petition calling for the release of the files?
Doesn't it show transparency that members of the Trump administration are willing to brief members of Congress whenever they please? Doesn't that show our level of transparency? Doesn't that show the level of transparency when we are willing to sit down with members of Congress and address their concerns? That's a defining factor of transparency.
No, you have it all wrong. You don't understand. It's not a shadow lobbying effort by the White House to hide the president's associations with a pedophile. It's actually a radical act of transparency, and you should be grateful. Thank you for your service, Caroline. In the interest of all that transparency, though, can you tell us what the president told Congresswoman Boebert during their meeting?
Having discussions with members of Congress about various issues, and I'm not going to detail conversations that took place in the Situation Room in the press briefing room.
Yeah, didn't think so. Also, why is the president meeting with Boebert in the dang Situation Room to discuss Epstein? In a desperate post on his social media site, the president claimed the Epstein story was a hoax, just like climate change, huh? And that only, quote, very bad or stupid Republicans would fall into the trap. Trump will be able to take matters into his own hands on this. If the House passes legislation to force release of the Epstein files, which is likely since a majority have signed the discharge petition, and Republicans who didn't sign it indicated they will vote for the bill if it does reach the floor, it will then head to the Senate, where you could see more Republicans vote for release. And at that point, President Trump will have a choice. Either embrace transparency or veto the bill and maintain the cover-up. If he vetoes, the Senate could override that veto. So that'll be something to watch over the next few weeks. The House Judiciary Committee released an additional 20,000 emails that are currently being combed through by the public. So far, other people implicated for associating and corresponding with Epstein long after it was known to the world what type of guy he is include former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, former Obama White House counsel Catherine Rumler, Trump's current ambassador to Turkey, billionaire Tom Barrack, also billionaire Tom Pritzker, and Steve Bannon, and Peter Thiel. Reporters are also fleshing out another long suspected and significant Epstein association, his ties to the Israeli government, particularly its intelligence services. Dropsite News has published a series of investigations revealing the billionaire pedophile's work on behalf of Israel. One story is based on leaked emails belonging to former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who also previously headed up Israel's military intelligence directorate. Epstein's ties to Barak are well known, But DropSite revealed that Epstein also helped negotiate security deals between Israel and other countries, like Mongolia and Cote d'Ivoire. And also, Epstein was involved in setting up a back-channel negotiation with Russia on behalf of Israel during the Syrian civil war. DropSite's latest reporting, which is also based on Barak's leaked emails as well as calendars released by the Judiciary Committee, show that between 2013 and 2015, a high-level Israeli military intelligence officer stayed at Epstein's Manhattan apartment multiple times. And during that time, Barak asked Epstein to wire money to the spy's bank account. DropSite couldn't confirm the purpose of the wire transfer based on the emails alone, so that must have been discussed offline. All of these dealings took place after 2012, after Epstein was prosecuted the first time for trafficking kids for sex. He cut a sweetheart deal, but everyone by then would have known what this guy's all about. So why was the Israeli government relying on his services to negotiate highly sensitive security dealings with far-flung nations around the world? It makes zero sense, unless Epstein was on the payroll all along as an asset. And if he was, boy, does that raise a lot of questions, huh? Namely, to what extent were his child sex trafficking and pedophilia crimes tolerated by Israeli intelligence or even U.S. intelligence, which had to have also known of Epstein's relations with Israeli spies? Man, this shit is wild. All right, we have to move on, though. Now to the latest in Venezuela. The country mass mobilized its armed forces in response to what the defense minister called an imperialist threat from the United States. The elevated posture was ordered just as the Pentagon announced that its largest warship, the aircraft carrier USS Gerald R. Ford, was now docked off the coast of Venezuela. While U.S. reinforcements flood the region, British spying partners are dipping out. The UK stopped sharing intelligence with the United States on suspected drug traffickers operating in Latin America out of fear that the intel was being used to commit international crimes. This is from CNN, which first reported on the development. Quote, "For years, the UK, which controls a number of territories in the Caribbean where it bases intelligence assets, has helped the US locate vessels suspected of carrying drugs so that the US Coast Guard could interdict them. But shortly after the US began launching lethal strikes against the boats in September, the UK grew concerned that the US might use intelligence provided by the British to select targets. British officials believe the US military strikes, which have killed 76 people, violate international law. The British are like, you're on your own. This is too depraved even for us." And finally, if you need a cup of coffee to get you through the day, don't go to Starbucks because there's a dang picket going on. More than 1,000 baristas across 65 cafes in 45 states are on an unfair labor practice strike against the company. The work stoppage coincides with Starbucks' Red Cup Day, a promotional event that is usually Starbucks' busiest sales day of the year. The strike was authorized last week by members of Starbucks Workers United. 92% voted in favor of it. The union organized the first Starbucks cafe back in 2021 and went on to unionize more than 600 stores. The company has refused to negotiate a labor contract with the union, and it's committed a number of labor violations against its pro-union workers. Today's strike is intended to pressure Starbucks back to the bargaining table. The union has used Red Cup Day in the past to stage limited one-day strikes, but this year is different, and the picket could persist. The union posted on Twitter, quote, "As of today, Starbucks workers across the country are officially on strike, and we're prepared for this to become the biggest and longest unfair labor practices strike in Starbucks history. Say no contract, no coffee with us. Don't buy Starbucks for the duration of our open-ended ULP strike. You hear that, friends? Get your bean juice elsewhere. Solidarity with the striking baristas. For this week in working class history, we're headed to Switzerland, 1918, for what's known as the National Strike, or Landesstreik. It was in response to Switzerland's mobilization during World War I, which spiked prices. That was good for business owners who also saw increased profits. But at the same time, workers did not get any raises, so they were getting crushed. Socialists, political parties, and labor unions organized together and created a new vehicle to mobilize workers around the country called the Olten Action Committee, or OAK. When the Swiss government began deploying the military to cities to tamp down on any economic unrest, OAK organized rolling strikes to force the soldiers to leave. Military attacked demonstrators in Zurich during an event to celebrate the one-year anniversary of the October Revolution in Russia. That attack prompted OAK to call for a nationwide general strike. The organization also put forward demands, including new elections, women's suffrage, old age and disability insurance, a 48-hour work week, and military reforms. Over 250,000 workers across the country heeded the call. The strike was carried in large part by rail workers, and it was most popular among German-speaking regions, where the populations were buoyant after news of the November Revolution in Germany. 3 rail workers were killed in the town of Gretchen when troops opened fire on them as they were tearing up the tracks. After 2 days of the general strike, OAK submitted to pressure from the government and told workers to return to their job sites. Most did, some stayed out a few days longer. None of the demands put forward by OAK were met initially, but the 48-hour work week was put in place a year later, and the strike did alter labor relations in Switzerland, with more businesses allowing workers to organize and collectively bargain. Thanks, as always, to the team at Working Class History for giving us access to their archives. They're on social media with more on the Landesstreik and other events that happened this week in history, including the 1933 Hormel Meatpackers strike, the IWW Lumber Wars of 1913, and the 1973 Athens Polytechnic strike against the Greek military junta. We'll be back with more next week. All right, friends, the show ends today with a sunrise from Texas. It was sent in by Zoe in San Marcos. Enjoy. Thank you, Zoe. That's the show. Thanks for watching, and thanks to the team behind the scenes. Find more MMN at means.tv. We also have YouTube and podcast channels, and you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky. One day capitalism will fall. Till then, we're going to be right here. See you tomorrow.